It's pretty rare for a book, really any book, to cut across cultures and time, like some do, especially one born from, well, one of history's darkest chapters.
Absolutely. And when a book sells, what, 16 million copies? Gets hailed everywhere as the symbol of human resilience, it almost feels wrong to question it.
Almost. And yet, that's kind of what we're here to do today.
Exactly. We believe that some books, even the most revered, must be challenged, critically examined, not, to tear them down, but to really understand their full weight, their limits.
The book we're focusing on is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Came out in 1946. Frankl, an Austrian neurologist, psychiatrist, philosopher.
And crucially, a Holocaust survivor. His experiences in the concentration camps during World War II, they're not just background, they are the foundation of the book.
His central idea, it really shook up psychology. That our main drive isn't pleasure or power, but finding meaning. The will to meaning, he called it.
And the really powerful part, his claim that life always has meaning, no matter what, even in the absolute horror of the camps. An idea forged in fire, truly.
So we're going to put this incredibly influential book through a rigorous analysis. We will believe that some books must be challenged.
Right. This critique uses, where it fits, a step-by-step critical thinking framework. We map the claims Frankl makes to the evidence he provides.
We also bring in an intellectual framework to sort out different levels of knowing, and we use ethical benchmarks, like the Golden Rule and the U.S. Preamble, to look for asymmetries.
And we'll wrap up with a logical analysis and aim for a balanced conclusion.
Also, just so you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's NotebookLM. We're aiming for a deeper, more dynamic book critique here.
Okay, so let's dive in. First off, the book structure. It's important because how it's complicated.
It's doing two things at once, isn't it? It's part memoir, deeply personal, about surviving the Holocaust.
And part psychological treatise, introducing his whole theory, logotherapy.
That tension, memoir versus theory, that's key, you said.
It is, because when you start mapping his psychological claims to his evidence, you see the limits. He claimed, for instance, that prisoners with a sense of purpose were more likely to survive.
And the evidence for that. It's those incredibly powerful stories, right? Inmates thinking about loved ones wanting to finish a book.
Exactly. Moving, unforgettable anecdotes. But from a scientific standpoint, it's largely observational evidence.
You mean?
Meaning it relies heavily on his personal witnessing, those anecdotes you mentioned, and maybe some selected case studies from his later practice. What's missing is, well, systematic data, controlled studies, comparison groups. That kind of empirical rigor isn't there.
So that's the first big critique point for the psychology side of the book, the lack of systematic proof.
Precisely. Powerful stories, yes. Robust scientific evidence for the specific claim about survival. That's much weaker.
Okay, so if the evidence is mainly stories, how do we classify the kind of knowledge he's presenting? Is it fact, opinion, understanding?
This is where that intellectual framework comes in handy. It helps us sort it out. We can see different levels.
Like,
well, his observations about specific prisoner behaviors say how artists maybe struggled more initially than manual laborers. That's factual knowledge level stuff. He saw it. Direct experience.
okay, makes sense. And the understanding level.
That comes when he connects those horrific experiences back to his existing psychological framework. He's not just reporting, he's integrating, synthesizing what he saw with theories of motivation. That shows real understanding.
But then he makes a bigger leap, doesn't he?
He does. His assertion that the survivors specifically possessed superior attitudes towards their suffering, that really stays at the opinion level. It's a powerful hypothesis born from experience. But
he can't prove it caused survival because the data is just not there systemically. It's his interpretation.
Exactly. It's his belief about what mattered. However, and this is important, the book definitely reaches the wisdom level.
How so?
Through the practical application. Using meaning-making as a therapeutic tool, logotherapy, that has clearly helped countless people. It has practical wisdom, regardless of whether the original premise about survival is scientifically watertight.
That's a really interesting distinction. The therapy can be effective, wise even, if the theory it initially grew from is, well, debatable on some points.
Right.
Okay, let's shift gears then. Let's talk about the logic. If the data is primarily anecdotal, where do the arguments themselves run into trouble logically?
Well, what's fascinating and tragic is how the extreme setting itself, the camps, actually introduces logical blind spots. It compromises the claim to universal psychological truth, the biggest one. It's the survival bias fallacy.
Survival bias. Wait, are you saying that because we only hear from the survivors? The data itself is skewed. The people who didn't make it can't tell us about their attitudes.
That's exactly it. It's a devastating point when you think about it. The analysis inherently excludes the vast majority who perished. We have no data on their attitudes, their search for meaning, or lack thereof.
So you can't actually claim that a certain attitude caused survival if you only studied the survivors. You only know what the survivors had in common.
Precisely. You can show correlation in the survivor group, maybe, but you can't prove causation without comparing them to those who didn't survive. The variable attitude can't be isolated as the sole or even primary cause.
Wow. Okay, that directly connects to another logical issue you mentioned, post hoc ergo propter hoc. After this, therefore because of this.
Correct. Frankl's writing strongly implies, or is often read as implying, that the positive attitude caused the survival. First attitude, then survival.
But it could just be correlation. Or something else entirely caused both, or neither.
Exactly. And maybe the people with that attitude also happened to be healthier to begin with, or got assigned to slightly less brutal work detail, or just got lucky. Attributing survival solely to inner attitude ignores massive external factors, especially in a death camp.
So we have survival bias distorting the data pool, and post hoc reasoning confusing correlation with causation. What's the third logical flaw?
Hasty generalization. The book takes insights from arguably the most extreme, horrific human environment imaginable, systematic, industrialized mass murder, and generalizes them to universal human psychology.
Applying rules from a concentration camp to everyday life everywhere.
Right. While the idea of finding meaning might be universal, the extent to which individual attitude alone can overcome that kind of systemic, organized destruction, that's a huge leap. It doesn't sufficiently account for different cultures, histories, economic situations, vastly different contexts.
Okay, and the last one, appeal to authority.
This is more about how the argument is often received. The book leans heavily on Frankl's credentials, psychiatrist, neurologist, and his undeniable heroism as a survivor.
Which lends it immense weight, obviously.
Of course, but that authority doesn't substitute for independent scientific verification of the therapeutic claims or the underlying causal arguments about survival based on controlled observation. His status shouldn't shield the ideas from rigorous scrutiny.
Makes sense. It's about separating the man and his experience from the scientific claims being made. Okay, before we move to the next section, we want to take a moment to mention Mindful Moments. That's our YouTube channel. We offer AI book analysis, summaries, critiques, and podcasts there, hoping to inspire reflection and, well, rational thought.
Good point, because now we need to tackle what might be the most difficult and perhaps most important part of this critique, the ethical side. How does Frankl's core idea stack up against fairness principles, like the Golden Rule or the goals in the U.S. Preamble?
This feels like the heart of the challenge to the book's philosophy, doesn't it? The idea that the argument, when flipped, has a really dangerous side.
It does. Applying that reciprocity test, the Golden Rule, reveals a potential ethical asymmetry that's deeply troubling.
Which is?
The implicit suggestion, however unintended, that positive attitudes correlate strongly with survival. It logically risks blaming the victims.
Blaming the victims of the Holocaust. How does it lead there?
If survival is presented as significantly linked to having the right attitude or finding meaning, then the unavoidable implication is that failure to survive might stem from a failure of attitude, a lack of meaning.
That's a heavy implication. Can you walk through the Golden Rule test on this?
Sure. The test asks, put yourself in their shoes. If you were facing systematic extermination in a death camp, would you accept the idea that your attitude was a primary factor determining whether you lived or died?
Probably not. You'd likely point to the gas chambers, the guards, the starvation, the disease, the system designed to kill you.
Exactly. The framework concludes that this line of thinking, if applied carelessly, enables harm by potentially justifying victim blaming. It places psychological responsibility on the individual for escaping a system of industrialized murder that was almost entirely beyond their control. The focus shifts internally when the problem was overwhelmingly external.
A profound ethical flaw, then, not necessarily in the therapeutic use for other kinds of suffering, but specifically when applied back to the context it came from.
That's a good way to put it. Context is everything.
We also looked at the book through the lens of the U.S. Preamble goals,
Right.
gauging its broader social impact.
Right. And the results there were quite mixed, reflecting that same tension. For established justice, we scored it pretty low, a 4 out of 10.
Why so low?
Because the focus is so intensely internal on the victim's psychological state. It almost completely bypasses questions of perpetrator accountability, systemic injustice, the rights of the oppressed. The ethical demands on the system are left unexamined.
Okay, what about form a more perfect union?
Higher, a 6 out of 10. Promoting individual resilience is generally good for society, but there's a risk. Suggesting that some victims had better attitudes than others can create a kind of moral hierarchy among victims, which can divide rather than unite.
I see. And promote general welfare.
Also a 610, logotherapy clearly offers huge benefits, but those benefits often flow most easily to people who already have some psychological resources or basic safety and stability to do that deep inner work. It might be less immediately helpful for those still trapped in continuous structural suffering.
And finally, secure blessings of liberty.
Again, 610. Frankl powerfully emphasizes the last human freedom, the freedom to choose one's attitude. It's inspiring. But the focus is so much on inner freedom that it tends to overlook the need for collective liberation, for changing the oppressive structures themselves. It can subtly favor individual adaptation over fighting for external freedom.
So looking at the long run,
Yeah.
what are the social consequences?
Well, logotherapy becoming institutionalized, helping millions, that's a massive positive. But the potential downside is that this intense focus on individual meaning finding might draw attention away from tackling structural injustice.
How so?
If the solution is always framed as internal adaptation, finding meaning within the system, it can inadvertently support the status quo. It doesn't inherently challenge systems that might be causing the suffering in the first place. It could, paradoxically, make populations more compliant.
Okay, so after all that,
Yeah.
this deep, critical look,
Yeah.
what's the takeaway? We have to start by acknowledging the book's power, right?
Absolutely, unequivocally. Frankl offers profound insights into resilience, into purpose. His therapeutic techniques clearly empower people facing awful, unavoidable situations, and his own courage, turning that unimaginable suffering into something that helps others. It's just immense. It is a vital book.
But those weaknesses, the logical gaps, the ethical concerns,
Yeah.
they can't just be brushed aside, especially when people treat it as a universal psychological law book.
No, they can't. That potential for implicit victim blaming, however unintentional, is a serious ethical issue if the context is ignored. And the methodological limits mean it's not really a scientific proof of attitude causing survival in that extreme setting.
So the focus on individual meaning, while powerful, might risk letting oppressive systems off the hook.
That's the risk. It can prioritize individual coping over collective action and systemic change.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with some tough questions to chew on. Like, how can therapies focused on meaning avoid blaming victims when the suffering is systemic, external?
And maybe how can logotherapy evolve to address those structural causes, not just the individual's response to them?
These aren't easy questions.
Not at all. And for anyone wanting to explore this further, there are definitely more readings. Frankl's own follow-up works, like The Will to Meaning or The Doctor and the Soul, expand on his theories.
But also critical perspectives are crucial here. Lawrence Langer's work on Holocaust testimonies offers a very different lens, and Primo Levi's The Drowned and the Saved is absolutely essential reading on survival and the gray zones.
Right. And for how these ideas are used now in more empirical ways, look into researchers like William Breitbart or Paul Wong, who build on meaning-centered therapy with more data.
So, wrapping it up, our critique finds a book of genuine, often life-changing insight, but it's undermined by certain methodological issues and, critically, some troubling ethical implications if read without context.
It really requires careful reading, honoring its contributions, absolutely, but also understanding its very real constraints and potential dangers.
We do want to acknowledge the systematic framework and critique sources that inform this whole analysis. Making this addendum is part of our commitment to transparency and rigorous thinking. Click the link you see on screen for the in-depth book analysis.
Subscribe, share, maybe purchase the book through the link if you're interested, and keep thinking rationally.
And check out our other genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.